The Book of PADRAIG by Mildred Downey Broxon. This story was published in the third of editor Judy-Lynn Del Rey's stellar anthologies in 1977. Read by Daryl T. Smith II from my channel Quasar Spectra. The Book of PADRAIG. In the twilight of his life, Teval landed at Stonebleak, Arran, flew to Shannon Airfield, gateway to the gale, and took the hydrofoil up the river. He enjoyed the leisurely pace of surface travel, skimming between green rolling banks. It was good to revisit the scenes of his youth. He was ready for death, but he had errands during the brief time that remained before grayness claimed him. He had been summoned from his obscure cataloguing by the curator of the Museum of Repar. After all the years, all his education, Teval was but a functionary in a routine job, but he was home on Repar, and in the museum, surrounded by beauty and history. He was at peace. The curator's office was black, save for one area, yellow-lighted, and in it, "You collected this, Teval?" the curator said. His voice was faint and raspy. It fluttered with soft sounds. Teval wondered to what planet he had been adapted in his youth that left its mark on him as Earth had on himself. In the dark, Teval stood, proud. He was being noticed. "I collected it myself, indeed. I carried it with me until my return. Then I donated it." "Primitive," the curator interrupted. "Two-dimensional. We have recorded it for reference in the event." He was disdainful. "It is ever required." Teval reached out. "I worked on it myself. You have no idea what it was like there. Only I know." "It is yours, then. You have no further need of possessions. Return it to the natives, if you will." Teval was dismissed, and so, in the twilight of his life, Teval returned to Ireland, and the Gael. The countryside had changed. He noticed the ruined castles first. They stood shattered on hilltops or crumbled in pastures, stone wrenched from stone by the force of time and the fortunes of war. None of them had been built when last he walked this land, centuries before the Norman invasion. These people lived so fast. Generation trampled generation, and war followed war. All he had known were now dusty molecules. Over the microphone, the tour guide spoke, first in English, then in Gaelic. "Ladies and gentlemen, ahead we see Clonmacnois, founded in the 6th century by St. Kieran." Teval stared, overwhelmed by the evidence of time. The Shannon still flowed broad and reed-rimmed here, but on its banks so many buildings stood, roofless ruins, built since his last trip. The wooden structures were all gone. The small stone church alone remained. New at his first arrival, it stood crowded in a graveyard. "The oldest building here," the guide said, "is St. Kieran's Church, Teampel Kieran, dating from 800 AD. In its time, Clonmacnois was an eminent center of learning, one of the universities of Europe." Gaelic, Teval noted, had changed over the centuries. He could not tell about English, as his was newly learned. The hydrofoil coasted toward the dock, settling back onto the water. The passengers rose to disembark. Still, Teval sat, looking out the window, aware of the weight within his lure-skin backpack. An eminent center of learning. He had been young then, and one of his tasks, or privileges, in Teval's language the concepts were identical, was to examine and appreciate alien cultural development. His group was chosen to see Earth. They were cosmetically humanized and scattered over China, Arabia, India, and Abyssinia, sent to the Mayans, the Inca, the Aztecs, Eskimo, and Norse. 3/14 of them there were, but Earthfolk counted to base 10, Tebal knew. His new hands were awkward. Tebal, one of those assigned in Western Europe, was sent to the Irish monastery at Clonmacnois. He found it not too difficult to blend in. Amid the babble of tongues, the variance of dress, the confusion of customs, he was merely another foreigner, an alien amid aliens. From all parts of Europe, students came. Here books were preserved. Here reading and writing yet lived. Here survived the learning of those who had flourished before barbarians overran the known world. Seeking scarce knowledge, folk flocked to Clonmacnois. Tebal longed in that fog and rain-enshrouded land for the jeweled nights of Ripar's star-rich sky, for perfumed drink and aromatic food, for the company of his kind, for ease and entertainment and luxury, skin music and mind colors. Life at Clonmacnois was dull, gray toil, rough clothing, plain food, and far too much silence. Such a short time they have to live, he thought in his youth, and how they waste it for this religion of theirs. But it was the religious at Clonmacnois who had the learning and kept the books, so the young nobles and the half-tamed barbarians disciplined themselves to monasticism. Up early, pray, work in the scriptorium if skilled enough, if not, practice on wax tablets, more prayer, a scant meal of porridge, lest the stomach be burdened and the mind confused, then prayer and silence and meditation. Bend over the books carefully, not touching or marking them. Listen to readings, go to bed at sundown when the light fails, and rise in the darkness to pray. To Tebal it was only an episode, an interlude during which he would learn patience. It was not his nature to complain. Time stretched on, and he stayed. Finally he took monastic vows and received the Celtic tonsure. His head was shaved back halfway from his brow. What was the pledge of one human lifetime to such as he? He was to learn all he could until his group was summoned home. His body, of course, would bear the mark of earth forever. The rhythm of life became natural to him. The wheeling of the seasons, the joy-to-sorrow cycle of church festivals, year after flickering year. When his hands became skilled, he was permitted to work with ink and vellum in the scriptorium, he who had learned to write with coded light. He whittled goose quills and mixed brown gall ink. He copied page after page, leaving the color work on the glowing illuminated capitals to others, doing instead the work any printing machine could have done. But machines were far in this world's future. Writing itself was a rarity, and a book was a treasure beyond price. His book, recorded, then discarded. Had custom not demanded the donor be told, it would have been destroyed. His book. In the hydrofoil, Tebal hefted his backpack and rose to walk down the aisle. Brother PADRAIG had loved books. Amazing how many monks were called PADRAIG. This particular one was chubby, blond, and had a tendency to complain. He was a younger son of a chieftain, destined from birth for the church. But he had never quite resigned himself to the monastic life. The rule of silence was one he could not keep. PADRAIG was most at home in the scriptorium, where he painted designs of such imagination and intricacy that even Tebal, who had played with Ankarian holograms as an infant, could only watch in awe. Part of the time, of course, PADRAIG spent digging in the garden as penance for his many transgressions, digging and complaining to the carrots and cabbages. perhaps as much to restore the blessed silence of Clonmacnois as to broaden PADRAIG's horizons, the old abbot ordered him to deliver a book to the monastery at Kells. PADRAIG asked if Teval might accompany him. The abbot, doubtless thinking Teval a steadying influence, agreed. Teval was surprised to be invited, but he was here to learn. "I have seen you admiring the drawings, Teval," said PADRAIG as they set off on foot. "I thought you might appreciate the treasures at Kells." Teval nodded. Silence caused few problems. The road to Kells was long. They received hospitality on their way, as was the custom in the land. Wherever they lodged, PADRAIG took pains to keep the book dry and safe, for it was a great treatise by Galen. Galen! Of what use was Galen? Teval himself had helped scribe the book, biting his tongue to keep silence as he copied page after page of misinformation, setting down wrong anatomy and useless herbals, all in a clear, round, uncial script. Away from the monastery, PADRAIG came into his own, singing snatches of bawdy songs, telling tales of Maeve and Cuchulainn, guzzling ale, smiling at women, neglecting his devotions. Rarely did they lodge at monasteries, but rather sought accommodation in chieftains' stone-walled raws. PADRAIG did, however, stop one Friday at Clonard, so the brothers may be released from their fast for the day. They took more time than necessary to reach Kells, or so the brothers there implied. The abbot accepted the copy of Galen with gratitude, though the tight-lipped brother librarian sniffed at it for crowding too many lines onto the page. He then showed their own library, and in triumph escorted them to the church, where he displayed the great gospel book the community had carried from Iona when it fled the Viking raids. Teval, awestruck, stared at the jeweled and golden cover, at the intricate designs, the glowing multicolored inks. Unusual for him, PADRAIG said nothing. For the rest of their stay at Kells, PADRAIG kept his silence. He observed the work in progress in the scriptorium, scrutinized the volumes in the library, and somehow made off with the brothers' secret recipe for black ink. At last, PADRAIG and Teval headed home to Clonmacnois by a circuitous route. PADRAIG seemed determined to stop at every raw, speaking with every bard, sing late every night. One evening, when the ale was stronger than usual, he began to tell Teval of a project, but he quickly stopped and said no more. The weather grew cold. A stiffness of the limbs troubled PADRAIG on damp mornings, and he coughed at night. He remarked to Teval that it must be wonderful to be young and strong again. Teval smiled and said nothing. "Have I lived here so long?" At night, sleepless as usual, his kind required little rest. Teval would step outside to search the stars. Even if only a few wisps of cloud sped across the sky, he could never find his own sun. It was too dim and too far away. When will they come for me? With the first hard frost, PADRAIG and Teval returned to Clonmacnois. Within the year the old abbot died, and PADRAIG, who had been strangely quiet of late, was elected to his place. Teval stepped onto the dock and felt the chill winds bite. He had forgotten how cold, even in summer, this part of the planet was. The Shannon, glassy green, flowed by as ever, bearing in its waters chemicals unknown when Teval last trod its banks. He shrugged his thin shoulders under his lure-skin backpack, feeling the bulk and heaviness inside. Across the dock flapped sad little banners proclaiming the 10th anniversary of the gale. Ulster had first joined Scotland. When Wales and the Irish Republic demanded entry, the Gael was born. England, crumbling economically, made feeble protest. But England's problems were shared, and internal rivalries were yet strong. A Celtic nation seemed ridiculous in the modern world. Who cared? With starvation and war and daily ugliness, what was the use of being a nation of bards and artists? Teval had studied well for his return. The banners he saw were in Uncial script, but they were written in English. Clonmacnois, the guide was saying, was repeatedly sacked by the Vikings. Its treasured manuscripts were scattered or destroyed. The round towers are thought to date from the time of the raids. A little after they began, thought Teval, for they were not here in my time, and I left when... But first there was the sickness. Antibiotics would have cured the plague. With decent medical care, most of the stricken would have survived, but it was not Teval's place to tell the monks that their herbs and infusions were worthless. He himself was immune to disease, as he was almost immune to time, so he helped in the infirmary, nursed the sick of the community, the students and the local farmers, for after all, a monastery was bound to help in time of need. When even the brother infirmarian grew ill, Teval alone carried water, changed linen, administered useless medicine, and gathered herbs from the garden. All work in the scriptorium was suspended. PADRAIG, who had been abbot now for years, was not spared. When he grew ill, he babbled of some secret book, some masterwork he was scribing, and Teval recalled the almost confidence of years before. When frost chilled the river mist and gleamed silver on the reeds and grass, those who did not succumb to the racking autumn cough recovered. Pale and weak, they rose from their pallets and went back to work. All but PADRAIG. His hands shook, and he coughed continually, so that he could no longer hold a pen. Moreover, his eyes had grown dim, and a novice now had to read aloud to him. Toward Easter, when it became obvious that his was no temporary infirmity, he called for Teval. Teval stood in the dim-lit cell. PADRAIG, no longer plump, lay propped on sheepskins, a woolen shawl about his shoulders, his hands fluttering on the bed coverings, restless, useless, uncontrollable now, spotted with age as once they were with ink. Teval, time spared, looked at him in pity. "Teval," PADRAIG said, "I remember you cared for me when I was ill, did you not?" "That I did," said Teval. "When the fever was on me, I spoke of a secret project. You must have heard me, and I thought I knew not what I said." "Men speak in fever many things," said Teval. "I spoke of a book, one I scribed myself, one finer than the great gospel book of Kells. Remember the old librarian?" PADRAIG smiled. "If pride is a sin, he burns, though his was only the keeping of the book, not the making of it. But I have scribed this book myself, and it is no copy." He tried to sit up. "In it I recorded the songs of the bards, the ancient pagan tales, the stories of the gods who went before." He coughed. "And I wrote it in our own language, not that of the Romans. I wonder now if I did wrong." "You, the abbot, ask me?" said Teval. PADRAIG coughed again. "I never wanted to be a monk, let alone abbot." His milky eyes were sad. "Life is short, but which of us can decide how he will spend it? Promise me this, Teval. On my death you will take the book and keep it. I fear the barbarians who struck Iona will strike here. All our books will be burned, and all our learning forgotten. For years I have worked waking nights telling no one. It will not be finished now." Padraig looked at his palsied hands. "And still I had stories." "I am no artist," Teval said, "but a fair scribe, and silent." The abbot stared. "And you, a monk, would do this thing?" "I would," said Teval. "Speak, and I will write." "So I did," Teval recalled, "and never, by my promise to Padraig, told I any man, but I completed it and kept it safe." A day of swords followed a night of fire. Dragon-prowed ships sailed up the Shannon to plunder and slaughter. Teval watched and knew his time here was measured in hours. This was the end of his life at Clonmacnois. Younglings were always removed from danger, and the situation here was dangerous indeed. The raiders struck the library first. Hooting, they carried forth the volumes, stripped off the gold and jeweled covers, then set the glowing pages to the torch. Any who cried out for his life work was flung onto the pyre as well. Teval said nothing. His meekness enraged the raiders, who spoke to him in a language he'd not learned. They bound his arms, struck him, and threatened him with the sword. "If the monitor is working," he thought, "they will be coming for me soon." He was marched toward the fire to where the books were burning. His books. He saw Padraig dragged forth from his burning hut, his ancient bones cruelly jostled, his face twisted in pain, his near-blind eyes staring at the fire. With a yell of rage, Teval burst his thongs. He knew he should not display his strength, but he was young and forgot. He rushed toward those who held the abbot. The raiders laughed and put the old man to the sword. A soft sound, brightness into crimson. Then they turned on Teval. The leader, a huge man, stepped forward, holding his still dripping sword. "You next, coward with strength," he said in broken Gaelic. "Mine will be your killing, and it slow." The earth shuddered. Monks and raiders alike looked up at the shape that descended from the sky. "Teval, evacuate." The voice of the monitor was cold inside his skull. "Now." The raiders stood frozen. Teval pushed past the leader and ran toward Padraig's hut. The burning thatch dropped chunks of the fire onto the rush-strewn floor and straw bedding. "The book!" He looked back at the ship one moment as it touched down. He was disobeying. He plunged into the hut, pulled aside the flaming bedding, and scrabbled for the book. Its leather cover had protected it. He clutched it to him and ran for safety. Not until later, much later, shipboard, did he notice that his hands were burned. "Early Christian grave slabs are displayed on the walls of the gallery," the guide said, gesturing at a stone-walled corridor. Teval looked down its length. For one moment he blinked, thinking he saw, but no, it was centuries past that his ship had rescued him, and this tapering structure was built of stone. The entrance was partway up the wall, that and the usual small windows. He smiled and shook his head. Someone had survived to tell stories, and someone else had remembered and built. He hefted his backpack and walked down the gallery, looking at the weathered slabs set in the wall. Centuries of wind and rain had scoured the lettering, dulled the carving. The stone was porous now, Lycan's home. He read no familiar names. "I have brought your book, Padraig, but where are you? Where are they all?" Beyond the gallery, a great crop of gravestones had sprouted in the enclosure, the dead crowding onto what they hoped was holy ground. There was where the Norsemen had built their fire. On that spot the herb garden once grew. All was covered now with centuries of stone and history. Teval stood looking at the two round towers. All over Ireland they and others like them stood. Bell towers? Places of refuge? Refuge, perhaps. He smiled. They are crumbling while I yet live, for a time. He wandered away from the group. Stones erected centuries since his time were tilted, their inscriptions erased. I have lived long enough and traveled far, Teval thought. In all that time I have treasured this book and shared it with beings stranger than any in PADRAIG's mythology. But when I wished to leave it for the ages will have it yet. He looked at the towers, stone rockets pointed at the sky. His monuments, and they already old. He climbed back into the hydrofoil and sat, watching the river flow, waiting for the tourists to return. The library at Trinity College was dim. Dusty centuries slumbered on the shelves, and 2 rows of marble busts stared down at the line of visitors. Teval shuffled forward, a few steps at a time, his pack still heavy on his back. The line was long, as usual. No one hurried. After all these centuries, the Book of Kells was still worth perusing. Eyes used to dull printed pages and flickering holovision paused a while to appreciate the colors, vivid after centuries, the swirling, surreal patterns, details too small to be seen without magnification, the essentially Celtic riot of design and color, adapted to a Christian gospel book. It lay encased in glass, in a filtered atmosphere. The fumes of modern Dublin would corrode the pigments. The pages were now turned by mechanical means. In years past, a card said, the case had been unlocked that a gloved librarian might turn 1 page a day. But now the book sat guarded like a jewel, untouched by human fingers, breath, or life. Teval had touched the book once, after washing his hands, of course, but that was many years ago, in Kells. Kells Priory itself was ruined now. All that stood there at his time destroyed. In the modern church was a facsimile of the book. The abbot had sent the book itself to Dublin for safekeeping, in Cromwell's time. He leaned forward and looked. The gold and jeweled covers were gone, lost in a raid. He'd read of that. And a few beginning and end pages were missing. The pigments were ever so slightly faded, and some of the vellum was turning brown. He looked at the brush strokes forming the capitals. He had always wanted to indulge his fancies, create beauty, but he had no talent for art, not with his human hands. He stood for a long moment, saying goodbye. A pair of giggling schoolboys followed him. They grew silent, looking at the book. "Isn't that in Gaelic?" one of them whispered. "No, Latin," said the other, educated and superior. "They didn't write Gaelic then. Nobody did." Some of us did, Teval thought. At the end of the line, people wandered off to stand before the glass-fronted cases of special exhibits. Some stared at Brian Boru's harp, its frame time-blackened, its strings slack. Many were herded out to other attractions. Teval followed them into the corridor and up, not down, the stairs. He was correct. Here was the familiar, dismal dustiness of cataloging rooms and stacks. One office, the door ajar, was particularly cluttered, almost homelike. Boxes and piles of books were strewn over table and floor alike. An elderly man was bent over one page, examining it through a magnifying glass. Teval could move very softly when he chose. He opened his pack. The bright blue scaly leather rustled only slightly and pulled out the parcel. The waterproof wrapping was off-world and must be removed. He hefted his burden one last time. One quiet step into the room, reach out slowly, set the book atop a stack. Done now. One more step out, back down the hallway. A guard appeared behind him. "Sorry," he said. "This area is off-limits to visitors." "I apologize," said Teval. "Trespass was not meant. I was separated from my tour and thought—" The guard considered him. "I'll be needing to check your parcel, you know." Teval proffered it. He looked inside. Naught but a bit of plastic wrap in here. Sorry to trouble you, but—" Teval nodded. "I would not wish you to be less than careful," he said. "It's your job, of course, and all those lovely books." The guard smiled. They are that." He paused, evidently considering another possibility, but who would bomb a library? Those times were surely past. Teval returned his gaze with all the innocence of centuries. The guard began to speak, then thought better of it. "I'll be showing you the stairway, then," he said. "Mind you don't miss your group. They'll be waiting for you out to the right, you know." Teval's pack was empty now, uncomfortably light. He went down the curving marble stairs to the gift shop, where he bought a full-sized plastivellum facsimile of the book. The weight was about the same. He would carry it until he needed no more possessions. Soon, he thought, there will be another book available. I'll never see it, but PADRAIG would have been happy. His is the more beautiful, and I took better care of it than could the monks at Kells. He stepped out into the cobblestone courtyard of Trinity. Tattered festival banners hung overhead, proclaiming the 10th anniversary of the founding of the Gael. They flapped, sooty and draggled, in the grey Dublin breeze. The Gael, still searching for its history. The history not of war and betrayal, but of song and beauty. And it was gone. So much of it was gone. But now they have the book of PADRAIG, and the old tales told before the divisions, then lost or suppressed. He was tired now. A biodegradable news sheet, already lacy and half deteriorated, flapped against his ankles. He looked down at the stone-gray, battered print and smiled. The round uncial lettering of PADRAIG's book, and his, was yet clear and dark. Centuries had passed. It was time to return to Ripar, the last trip home. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.